Hey, thank you everyone for coming or tuning in to our presentation. My name is Rachael Brard.
And I'm Gillian Watson.
And our capstone project is titled Pathways to Environmental Justice, Considerations for Equitable Outdoor Programming and Public Land Access in Eagle County, Colorado. I would like to start out today with a land acknowledgement specific to the land we conducted our research on, but recognizing the historic and current presence of other Indigenous peoples on the land we are currently presenting on. We would like to respectfully acknowledge that our research was done on the ancestral lands of the Ute peoples. The Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne tribes' longstanding presence shaped these lands, and they continually work to fulfill their duties as stewards and caretakers of the environment. After thousands of years of residing on and cultivating relationships with this land, many Native peoples were victims of genocide or forcibly displaced by settler colonialism and the actions of the United States government. By acknowledging the Ute tribe's historic and present relationship to the lands now known as Eagle County, we hope to honor their indigeneity and resiliency, as well as to recognize the role of descendants of European settlers on these lands.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'll begin with a bit of background and context for our project. Meetings with our organizational partner, the Eagle Valley Land Trust, or EVLT, began at the end of November 2021. Bergen Josem, the Deputy Director of EVLT and an alum of the Conservation Leadership Program at CSU, has been our primary contact and advisor throughout the project. EVLT is a 501c3 nonprofit land trust founded in 1981 by rancher Roger Tilkemeyer, along with other like-minded community members who saw the need to protect their land in Eagle County in the face of growing development in the area. And currently, the land trust holds conservation easements on 39 properties that include working ranches, scenic view sheds, riparian and wildlife habitats, as well as community open space. So Eagle County is located approximately 130 miles west of Denver in northwestern Colorado, and it's a gateway to outdoor recreation opportunities. It encompasses 9 towns over 1,700 square miles and sits between 6,000 and 14,000 feet in elevation. It's very mountainous. Over 80% of the county's land is public, split between national forests, wilderness areas, U.S. Bureau of Land Management areas, and state and local public lands. Interstate 70 runs east-west through the center of the county, cutting through extensive forest belts of aspen and lodgepole pine. Wildlife species in the county include the yellow-bellied marmot, black bear, bald eagle, osprey, and sage grouse, among many others. The Eagle County's ecosystems depend immensely on a well-functioning hydrological system. So with an average annual snowfall of 78.4 inches per year, it's one of the snowiest places in Colorado. County's major waterways are the Eagle and Colorado rivers, and Eagle County's economic, social, and environmental sustainability depends upon the quantity, quality, and seasonality of its water resources. So as you can kind of see, the health of Eagle County's natural ecosystems is also inseparably tied to a sense of place and identity for its residents. Speaking of those residents, we have a bit of information about the demographic of the county from the 2020 census. The county's population was 55,731. Median household income was at around 85,000. So this is a pretty wealthy area. Poverty rate at 8%, and median property value around 560,000. The 5 largest ethnic groups in the area are people who identify as white, around 67%. White, Hispanic, and other Hispanic combines around 29%. 2+ races around 1%, as well as Black or African American identities around 1%. And we just want to give a quick note on the difference between the terms Hispanic and Latinx. We'll be using both of these terms throughout our presentation. Hispanic is an overarching term for people from Spanish-speaking countries, which was coined in the 1970s to represent these communities on the US Census. And Latinx refers more specifically to people from Latin American countries. Since both are used as identifiers by Spanish-speaking people in the country, we include them both so as not to exclude anyone who uses one term or the other. Additionally, we do recognize that ethnic groups are not homogeneous entities with singular ideas and values, and emphasize the importance of expanding upon our foundational research in order to understand diverse viewpoints of individuals within ethnic groups. So overall, Colorado is becoming increasingly more diverse. The Colorado State Demography Office predicts that 45% of residents will identify as non-white by 2050. And one of these reasons it's important to think about these people as in regards to Colorado's recreation economy, which is a very important part of the state's economy, which is sentiment related by 90% of Coloradans in a 2017 study. So we have some numbers up here around its economic contribution. For example, recreationists in 2017 spent $36.8 billion on outdoor trips and equipment. Recreation, its economic output was $62.5 billion, and the gross domestic product it provided was $35 billion, which is 10% of the entire state's GDP. So these numbers highlight the importance of recreation to Colorado's economy and support the need to adapt the industry to current trends and climate change issues. Eagle County does understand this importance and has created a community resilience plan to address economic, social, and environmental sustainability. So next we'll talk a little bit about recreation equity as it relates to Eagle County. Located along the western slope of Colorado, Eagle County contains world-class recreation opportunities. However, not all recreation access is created equal. Many of these opportunities have a hefty price tag attached, especially if you're talking about entrances to ski resorts or needing adequate gear to get outdoors. Additional barriers could include a lack of awareness of outdoor opportunities, not having adequate transportation, perceived risk, and simply not having enough time to get out. On a national level, 46% of people identifying as non-recreationists have a desire to start. That's from a CPW study, highlighting the need for programs that can give people outdoor experiences for the first time. There are a lot of organizations in the Eagle Valley working to address these barriers and make the outdoors more accessible to a diverse population. One of those is the Eagle Valley Outdoor Movement, which is a group of community members and organizations who are working to provide equal access to the outdoors for youth and families in the Eagle Valley. So EVOM is an invaluable asset to people who live in the Eagle Valley who would not otherwise have the ability to participate in these activities, and they were an integral project to our partner to our project. There we go. So EVOM focuses much of its efforts on the Hispanic and Latinx communities in the region, which is a group that, as we talked about, makes up about a third of the population, but are traditionally underserved in outdoor recreation. However, just because these are underserved groups doesn't mean they're uninterested or not already participating in these outdoor activities. A national study found that 48% of Hispanic people in the US participate in outdoor recreation activities. So it's important to understand why and how these communities participate so that outdoor programs and recreation plans can suit the needs of a diverse range of recreationists. So insights into the values and preferences among underserved groups, such as the Hispanic and Latinx communities, can be found in large studies like we've talked about, but data specific to Eagle County in Colorado is lacking. So our project focused on researching these values and preferences among community members in the region so that our partner organization, EVLT, and others that support conservation and recreation initiatives such as EVOM can understand how to best serve their community. Thanks.
All right, so one of Eagle County's culturally and historically important outdoor recreation areas is an area known as the Sweetwater Lake property. There's an image of it behind the text here. It is a 488-acre historic ranch situated in Garfield County, but with its main access roads and main local community in Eagle County. It's surrounded by White River National Forest, United States BLM lands, and private lands, and contains a 77-acre lake, a cave with Ute pictographs, and a 216-acre raptor protection area. When the Sweetwater Lake property went up for sale a couple years ago, development ideas included luxury housing, a golf course, and a water bottling plant, among some others. So in 2019, a campaign was started to save the lake by the Eagle Valley Land Trust, our partner, the U.S. Forest Service and White River National Forest, and the Conservation Fund, with a goal to purchase, protect, and enhance Sweetwater Lake for the public. EVLT's role was to raise funds and local support for protection of the lake, and the Conservation Fund's role was to purchase that land and hold on to it until the Forest Service was ready to make that purchase from them. TCF was involved as a nonprofit that protects America's most critical lands and waters to provide greater access to nature, strengthen local economies, and enhance climate resiliency. And the Forest Service was a really great candidate for eventual ownership of this property because they own and manage a lot of the surrounding White River National Forest land, and they also have funding and access to funding from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, not to be confused with the Conservation Fund. The LWCF is funded by revenue from offshore oil and gas leases. Due to the success of the Save the Lake campaign, which raised over $100 million of support, and as well as 120 letters of support, including one from Garfield County, the Forest Service was able to leverage $8.5 million of funding from the LWCF and allowed TCF to acquire a low interest loan from Great Outdoors Colorado, which enabled TCF to then purchase the property in 2020. And then in 2021, the U.S. Forest Service used that allocated $8.5 million to purchase the property from TCF at market price. And then utilizing some of those profits, the Conservation Fund granted EVLT a $1.1 million Sweetwater Lake Stewardship and Equity Fund, which they aim to run as a quasi-endowment to support the short and long-term management, stewardship, and access to the property. And when we first began speaking with Bergen Jasem at EVLT, he emphasized the importance of documenting this Sweetwater Lake project for internal use, as well as potential resources that would be available to support our research if we decided to pursue this topic in any capacity. And so once we were considering this, we started researching more, and due to funding and staffing issues from the Forest Service, in October of 2021, a unique, first of its kind collaborative management partnership between a federal agency, the U.S. Forest Service, a state agency, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and a nonprofit, the Eagle Valley Land Trust, was formed by a memorandum of understanding to collectively plan and manage this site. So currently it is owned by the Forest Service, managed by this partnership, and operated on site by CPW. But later in October of 2021, Governor Polis announced that the Sweetwater Lake property would become Colorado's 43rd state park, which had some unintended consequences for the trajectory of the Sweetwater Lake project, which I'll get into. So although Garfield County initially supported that acquisition of the Sweetwater Lake property, they were not pleased with the new ownership by the Forest Service, the CPW becoming part of the management team, or Governor Polis's announcement that it would become a new state park. In the spring of 2022, more stakeholder engagement and public input was considered for future management planning of this property. But in multiple county commissioner meetings, some stakeholders started raising their voices about the Sweetwater Lake's management authority, transparency, and the whole project timeline. While the Sweetwater Partnership reassured citizens that no decisions had been made about the long-term future of the property, in a May meeting, Garfield County representatives began asserting narratives of fraud, embezzlement, and improper procedure, which even further altered the trajectory of the Sweetwater Lake project. So when we first started thinking about this, we believed that an evaluation and analysis of this collaborative management tool of the EVLT, CPW, and U.S. Forest Service partnership would be a really strong capstone project. But with discussions continuing and the Sweetwater Lake project becoming more controversial due to those really strongly held values regarding land ownership and management, we started to brainstorm some alternative project ideas. We decided to shift our capstone scope around May to fill some knowledge gaps, because in cases such as the Sweetwater Lake project, values and preferences for public land access and outdoor recreation may differ between the hyper-local community and the larger region that might utilize that area. Sweetwater and Garfield community members are concerned about the development of the new state park, overpopulation, not being able to access parking lots, speeding vehicles and traffic on the really small dirt roads that it takes to get out there, and other environmental damage. And the concerns of the Sweetwater and hyperlocal community have been heard, but don't necessarily represent the views of all stakeholders, as they have had a disproportionately loud voice in that management planning process.
So the project at Sweetwater Lake highlights just how passionate the members of these communities are about their public lands. And as Rachel said, though it is important to encourage the voices of all community members, no one group should have a disproportionate voice in the decision-making process. EVLT continues to expand its community conservation activities and to promote stewardship in the Eagle Valley. And our research provides a basis for understanding equitable access to public lands that EVLT and its partners can use to ensure that the entire community is heard in future plans for community conservation. So the purpose of our project was to collect information about outdoor recreation values and preferences, and to identify potential barriers to equitable access to public land in Eagle County and at Sweetwater Lake. With this information, we've provided considerations for future conservation work in order to help EVLT allocate funds more wisely and to develop community conservation activities. So what is community conservation? We define community conservation based on the writing of Armitage et al. As the leadership of local communities uniting in action for the protection of biodiversity and natural resources through multi-level governance processes in which values and preferences are respected, trust is built, and programs are co-developed with community members. The work we've done will allow EVLT to continue a legacy of addressing community problems through land-based solutions. In turn, they will be able to share what they learned through this process with a network of nonprofits and other land trusts throughout the state and country, making the results a multi-scalar and multi-dimensional learning opportunity for a variety of stakeholders. Okay, so the early stages of our project, once we established the underlying goal to identify barriers to accessing Eagle County public lands, including the Sweetwater Lake property, we decided that our primary method for collecting this information would be a community survey, which aimed to answer the questions you see on the screen here. So what values and preferences for outdoor recreation do Eagle County residents hold? What visible and invisible barriers to accessing public lands exist in Eagle County? What activities or infrastructure would encourage communities in Eagle County to spend more time on public lands? And are there opportunities for organizations to develop more accessible community conservation activities? While we finished our coursework and clarified our project objectives and a timeline, we've researched housing for our on-site research, secured funding, and had some initial meetings. We're able to secure a stipend of $6,000 total from the Sweetwater Stewardship and Equity Fund to cover housing, transportation, and supply costs for the 3 months we were doing research, split between the two of us. Additionally, EVLT board members were generous and gracious enough to host us both for 3 weeks throughout the summer. Our meetings with Bergen and others helped us determine specific objectives and potential partners in outdoor recreation, equity, and research and survey marketing. So over the summer, our first week on site in Eagle County, we started to develop partnerships and gather background information to inform a bilingual Spanish and English survey that we would create. We met with Renata Araujo from the Eagle Valley Outdoor Movement, Rachael Josem from Youth Power 365, as well as the rest of the EVLT staff members. So Renata from EVOM was integral to our research. She was supportive of our idea to conduct a bilingual survey, committed to helping us edit translations, and she's fluent in Spanish, and volunteered to help set up an EVLT sponsored event that we would host for the community. Additionally, EVLT staff member Addie Sharp committed to editing the iterations of our survey translations over the next 2 months. We had a good basis of support there. Before drafting the survey, we wrote an introduction and background document that detailed much of the information that we've presented so far today.
Also a note, we were able to visit this spot here that's an EVLT hosted conservation easement hike to Horn Ranch, and it's really, really cool. In addition to the background research that we did on recreation equity, environmental justice, and other topics, Renata Araujo from EVOM shared previous surveys that EVOM had conducted that we were encouraged to build upon and expand upon. Renata and Addie were instrumental in connecting us directly with that community, especially the Hispanic and Latinx community members we were hoping to connect with in our research on equity of outdoor recreation programming. They helped coordinate logistics for the event that we hosted on July 25th. That provided free transportation to Sweetwater Lake for a guided hike, an opportunity to use really high quality spotting scopes for bird watching, and a Q&A with US Forest Service staff, as well as a catered picnic lunch that was all funded by the EVLT Stewardship and Equity Fund. And the 20 or so attendees, some of them are pictured here, were all Spanish-speaking women and children of Latinx and Hispanic descent. We heard really valuable anecdotes and thoughts from the women attendees, which we then used to further edit our survey after pilot surveys were distributed. After gathering feedback from the respondents of the pilot surveys, we had many meetings with Berg and Jassem, and meeting with the EVLT executive director, Jessica Fowlis, Addie Sharp, and Renata Araujo, in which we discussed and implemented edits for the final draft of the survey, as well as started talking about how we would disseminate that survey. We debated a lot of questions, whether to keep them or leave them out, restructuring and reformatting, limiting response options, and other things that would solve that issue, some of the issues that we had. And a final draft was entered into the online survey platform Qualtrics, coded and ready for distribution on August 15th, which was about a month later than we originally intended to distribute our survey.
All right, so dissemination of our survey through Qualtrics began with us emailing our contacts at EVLT and EVOM and asking them to post the survey through their blogs, social media, and newsletters. We also put up flyers with QR codes around the community, including carnicerias and markets, libraries, as well as outdoor recreation sites. And this allowed us to speak directly with community members about the research we were conducting, sometimes in Spanish, and therefore building some level of trust with those individuals in the area. To further advertise the survey, we wrote a few articles for the Vail Daily newspaper. Addie Sharp from EVLT wrote a piece for the Trust Our Land section. We wrote a piece that was translated to Spanish by Estefania Godoy Vizcarra for the Vida Latina section. And Rachael wrote an additional article for EVLT's Trust Our Land in September. Because of an initial low response rate to our surveys, Bergen boosted a few curated social media posts on EVLT's platforms that advertised a $50 gift card raffle to Ptarmigan Sports, which is a sports shop in Eagle County.
And that is an example of what we put up in the community in person and part of what we advertised in the social media for Spanish speakers.
So because we used Qualtrics for data collection, we exported this data into a Google Sheet to review. Due to an issue with spam responses, we had to manually erase a lot of data that displayed repeated open-end responses, which we classified as spam. So in the end, we had 46 complete survey responses, which we've used to inform considerations for EVLT as conservation practitioners, but will not attempt to use to make generalizations about the population because it's not a big enough sample size to do so. Once we had a final data sheet, we imported it into IBM SPSS software for analysis. And since our goal was to gather information that can be used by conservation practitioners rather than used to publish an academic paper, we did not attempt to analyze for statistical significance. We instead analyzed variables to display frequencies of responses to our questions about values and preferences for outdoor recreation, as well as infrastructure on public lands, and to show the distribution of responses across different demographics. We use the crosstabs tool to investigate the relationship between multiple variables. For example, someone's zip code and whether or not they wish to spend more time outside. And many of our charts are made in SPSS, but some of them are made in Google Sheets because it's just a lot more user friendly.
Awesome. So now we'll get into some of the results from our survey. So this is a little map of the area of Eagle County, and you can see like the zip codes that correspond with these areas. So our respondents were mostly from Eagle at 31.9%, the Eastern Avon, Beaver Creek, and Eagle Vale area at 23%, and the Edwards, Western Avon, Wolcott, and Fulford area at 21%. A note is that EVLT is located in Edwards, and EVOM and the Walking Mountain Science Center associated with it are based in Avon. We also had an unlabeled bar and 81647 as a Garfield County zip code, but they all answered yes to being a resident of Eagle County, which is why we decided to utilize their responses in our survey. And out of our 46 total respondents, 11 identified as Hispanic and or Latinx, which is approximately 24% of our survey sample. And if we consider the Eagle County Hispanic and Latinx combined population to be approximately 29%, then our percentage of respondents approximately reflects that population for practitioner use. We also attribute some of that response pattern to how we decided to disseminate our survey, which was mostly through EVLT and EVOM, in addition to Vail Daily in English and in Spanish, as well as our in-person outreach. We also, about halfway through our survey, while we were trying to get more respondents and incorporated an incentive, we incorporated a question about how did you find this survey, which we suggest other people to do in the future. But we had exactly 50% of respondents able to answer this question who did, and 16 out of those 23 respondents found the survey through EVLT's social media or newsletter. And then diving deeper into the survey, we wanted to first get a baseline of values and preferences and feedback on popular activities without making assumptions about what Eagle County residents do for outdoor recreation. And our top two summer activities ended up being hiking at 22% of respondents and mountain biking. And then in winter, we had alpine skiing and snowboarding at 23% and snowshoeing at 5%. And then we also, rather than just activities, we also wanted to ask about amenities on public lands. So overall, top amenities included hiking trails, trash and recycling, and scenic views. Those were our top three. And we found that the majority white identifying respondents had really similar responses. So they definitely were very similar. But when we ran a cross-tabulation analysis of this question's results with the results of the demographic question of racial and ethnic identity, we found some varying results from those who identify as Hispanic and or Latinx. So our Hispanic and Latinx respondents are kind of down there in the red and the white identifying respondents in the blue. And the Hispanic and Latinx respondents answered that their top is restrooms. Their second is scenic views, similar to the overall response. And then vehicle parking, trail maps and signs, bilingual trail signs, and mountain biking trails all had a little bit of preference as well. So you can see that even with a small sample size, there was a little bit of a difference there. And this suggests that values that are held by different racial and ethnic groups may vary and should be considered when designing infrastructure for equitable public land access. And we would like to see EVLT research this further, use our findings coupled with CPW reports to inform the management partnership of Sweetwater Lake that would support diverse visitation to that new state park. Some activities that we could consider here would be like building restrooms or enhancing restroom access, ensuring that trails are well maintained so that scenic views are accessible, bilingual trail signs, clear and accessible trails with proper bilingual maps and signage, and also just clearly labeled and visible trash cans and other receptacles. We also wanted to know people's top reasons for visiting public lands. And again, overall was physical fitness at 31% of all respondents, enjoying nature also at 31%, and mental health. And we also found a similarity here where, similar to the amenities, that there were differences among the different demographic groups. So for the Hispanic and Latinx identifying respondents, their top reasons, number one was relaxation, which, as you can see here, Like 27% of our Hispanic and Latinx respondents chose relaxation, and a very small percentage of white respondents chose that. So that was a really interesting finding. They also selected enjoying nature, which is also similar to overall. And also spending time with family and friends was selected by these respondents. The results of our survey data reflect the importance of ensuring that amenities and programming do not simply reflect the preferences of majority populations. These results support findings from our research on broader national trends that Hispanic and Latinx communities use outdoor spaces differently from white recreationists, and that programming and amenities should not consider the values and preferences as one size fits all. This CPW report also found that spending leisure time with family is an important method of strengthening family bonds. Hispanic and Latinx families often have outdoor picnics with anywhere from 8 to over 100 family members at events that can last all day. And often these people might only have, or people in this community might only have one day off from work. So day trips are most common in that community. And that is again from CPW in 2020. It is important to understand why recreationists visit public lands so that we can prioritize programming that suits the needs and desires of unique groups and individuals. So our next section dives into some of those visible and invisible barriers to access. So invisible barriers to us are subtle, they may be self-inflicted or inflicted by others, and they can often be difficult to detect. Visible barriers are often physical or institutional, and they might be easier to name or describe. So to investigate barriers, we used 2 consecutive screening questions to narrow down the people who are facing barriers. First asking, do you wish to spend more time outdoors than you already do? Which we had 91% of our respondents saying yes to, and moving on to the next screening question. Those who responded no to that first screening question jumped down to our next section about activities and infrastructure. And an important note here is that all 11 Hispanic and Latinx identifying respondents selected yes to that question of wanting to spend more time outside. Our second question was, do you believe there's anything preventing you from spending time outdoors? And 70% or 29 of those 41 people who said yes to the previous question moved on to that new question and answered yes. So we had 29 people answering this next barriers question we'll get to. That second question is important because it's a self-identified beliefs that might denote the existence of some of those barriers. So diving into that question of, do you believe there's anything preventing you? We're transitioning to what prevents you from spending time outdoors, which is a difficult question to answer. We interpreted some options like I live too far away from public lands, or I don't have the appropriate gear as some of those more visible barriers. But options such as I do not feel safe outdoors, or I do not believe I have the physical ability to participate in outdoor activities as maybe some more invisible barriers, but there are definitely some that can be interpreted as both. Our number one response with 30% of respondents said that they do not have time to do outdoor activities. That's a difficult issue to try to deconstruct. Our second most common was other, with written answers, including I work too much, there's too many other people, lack of parking, and my family doesn't have time to take me there, related to transportation. And the third most popular was I do not know people to do outdoor activities with, which is something that we believe that EBLT and other Eagle County organizations could probably create opportunities to mediate. This is a more values-based question, but fits in with how we'll explain some of our considerations. So of the 46 Eagle County respondents, over 75% strongly agree that having access to public lands near their home is important to their well-being. And only 6% disagreed to any degree, which we would be interested in investigating further as well. And the last question specific to visible and invisible barriers are whether people feel welcome participating in outdoor activities. And over 78% of our respondents feel at least somewhat welcome participating in outdoor activities in Eagle County. We did run a cross tabulation for ethnic and racial identification with this question. And there was a higher percentage of respondents who selected very unwelcome who identified as Hispanic and Latinx, but we also have a really low sample size, so we would like to see that investigated further in the future. So after gathering all of this information about values, preferences, and barriers to access, we propose that access to free public outdoor spaces and opportunities to recreate in these spaces are basic needs. Here, research from Jennings and Bamcole in 2019 provides a conceptual framework which demonstrates the relationship between cultural ecosystem services from green spaces with beneficial social and health outcomes on the other end. Increasing fair access to these spaces is critical not only to equity in outdoor recreation or access to public lands, but also to equity of public health. From the Land Trust Alliance's page on community-centered conservation, everyone deserves to live in a healthy place and enjoy a connection with nature. When land trusts engage more people, they help improve more lives and build stronger communities. Land conservation, like every other sector in American society, has developed within a racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic system that has built and reinforced structures of power and privilege, causing the benefits of land conservation to be unevenly distributed and in some cases, denied to certain groups. With this understanding, it's imperative that we build a land conservation community that values and embraces diversity and strives to model tolerance, practice inclusivity, and work toward equity.
Okay, so a couple more data results here to get at what Rachel is talking about and solutions toward that initiative. So to identify what some of those community-centered conservation activities could be, we asked what would encourage you to spend more time outdoors, and allowed participants to select up to 3 statements from the list here, from things like accessing free gear, meeting people to do outdoor activities with, outdoor programs that run for free or at a low cost, etc. And most respondents were not sure if any of the given options would encourage them to spend more time outdoors, which there's not much we can do with that. We would need to research that a bit further. But the next most frequently selected options were free or low cost gear or programs, which are initiatives that EVLT has funding and resources to support, especially at the Sweetwater Lake property. This is a nice little picture of our hike out there with the family enjoying some, what were they, ptarmigan falcons or?
Oh, we had like some falcons and and we saw osprey and we saw some eagles, I think. We saw a lot of interesting things for this community. It's really cool.
Yeah. Additionally, to support the partnership that EVLT and EVOM have built hosting outdoor recreation centered programming, we asked participants what activities or programs they were interested in trying for the first time or doing more often. So people want to try a lot of things, which is very encouraging. But they're mostly interested in camping, canoeing and kayaking, wilderness survival skills, and hiking. So some good info on what sort of programming we could offer there, or EVLT could offer. So with all of our research, we've come up with some considerations for EVLT going forward. So overall, we encourage EVLT to continue searching for ways to engage Eagle County residents who may not typically be engaged by their social media, newsletters, or community events. Some examples of how this could be done include bilingual marketing materials for community events such as volunteer events, hikes on their conservation easements, or fundraising events. Continuing to partner with EVOM and to support their events financially and institutionally. Utilizing the Sweetwater Stewardship and Equity Fund to create new accessible outdoor recreation programs and infrastructure at the Sweetwater Lake property. This could be supported by asking the community via polls what dates or times would get the best turnout to get at that kind of lack of time, having bilingual guides or volunteers present, providing free transportation, paying a Ute tribe member to lead an activity, hike, prayer, or a workshop on the property. And some infrastructure options could include enhancing restroom access or installing gathering spaces or other infrastructure that is valued by these less represented parts of the community to encourage equitable access to the new state park. Additionally, we encourage EVLT to identify and foster partnerships with organizations in the county who are both working toward outdoor recreation equity, as well as those that have a mission to serve underserved groups in the community. So one idea we had was working with ski resorts and hotels who employ a lot of those seasonal workers who might not be having that time to get outdoors. Something like an employee culture program where they could partner with EVLT and get out and do volunteer events or go on hikes. There's also other organizations like Cycle Effect who work to get people outdoors, specifically on bicycles. Youth Power 365, who works mostly with families and in schools, but can really have a cross relationship with those values there. As well as there are some community markets in the county that provide a lot of community resources like food and other help. And we also recommend that EVLT staff could get involved in things that we've seen other nonprofits do, where they have staff volunteer days where you get paid your daily salary, whatever, and go do a volunteer event with an organization. We think that could really help tie staff members to the community and build that trust. Additionally, we think that EVLT could offer community building and networking events to meet the demand for opportunities to meet other people to do outdoor activities with. Lots of breweries in the area. People love an event at a brewery. Additionally, to create a new position, preferably for a local bilingual individual that focuses specifically on social media, communications, and media management. And finally, to use the Sweetwater Stewardship and Equity Fund to pay for a consultant to lead a training or workshop on those diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. Rachael and I were fortunate to attend the Equity and Conservation and Outdoor Recreation Summit for Action this fall, and met some really wonderful people leading that who have a consultancy called Eco-Inclusive, located here in Colorado, and they also do telework. And that's a very direct opportunity for EVLT to hire a consultant from that agency to come in and talk to their staff about DEI.
And we'll just wrap it up here with some of the challenges and then again, some further research on the next slide. So our first challenge we encountered was definitely around the Sweetwater Lake Properties project that was ongoing. Had many surprises and developments as we were starting to formulate what our project could be with the changing political landscape and strongly held values of land ownership and management. So we definitely had to shift the scope of our project, especially like right around the time we were going to start our on-site research. So that's definitely a challenge and something we had to be adaptable with. An additional note on Sweetwater is that we struggled with some of the lack of transparency of the Forest Service to provide information about involvement of the Ute tribe in that management partnership and the development of the Sweetwater Lake property management group. There is a historic Ute cave on the property, and we were told that a Forest Service employee was overseeing tribal relations, but it has been unclear what work is being done to incorporate Indigenous peoples into that process. And we did not have the resources to fully incorporate this aspect into the scope of our project. We also struggled finding affordable housing and employment in Eagle County to support us while we were there. We were really, really fortunate to secure a travel stipend and to have people willing to support us and host us in their homes for the time that we were up there. And we also struggled finding some flexible part-time employment that would have allowed us to also conduct research on site in Eagle County. And because of this not living there, we had some trouble disseminating the survey due to the lack of trust we were able to build with Eagle County's community. We would have loved to hold more events like this one at Sweetwater Lake. It was a lot of fun. People got so much out of it. The question and answer session with the Forest Service was super telling, and we got so many anecdotes that were really unique and important from that. But we wish we would have been able to do more of that. Lastly, was creating a bilingual survey is very, very challenging. For anyone who hopes to do that in the future, start early and think about your research questions that would extract that useful information, because it is a time-consuming process. Translating that survey into Spanish probably pushed our timeline back a month or so, because initial translation for parallel meaning, and then we had to send it out, wait for edits from our Spanish-speaking editors. And then we had to receive those, edit them ourselves, and then enter them back into the Qualtrics system. We also had a wonderful issue of, after we offered that $50 gift card and advertised it online, unfortunately, that resulted in over 500 spam responses to our survey that we had to manually sort through for our results. So keep that in mind if you decide to advertise any incentives. So for further research, we suggest that researchers try to reside in Eagle County, or at least spend one more long chunk of time in that area for research, where you can participate in community events, EVLT's events, or host events with EBOM, and that would allow a person to build more trust. In addition to that, applying for grants earlier, just even for housing and transportation, is really something that we suggest for future researchers here if they are working with EVLT, or if they're a CLTL cohort member working with EVLT. We also suggest EVLT builds upon those initial findings we have regarding different racial and ethnic groups that display different preferences for infrastructure and programming on public lands. We hope that in the future, whether it's EVLT or a CLTL staff member or CLTL cohort member that's working with EVLT, would try to do some focus groups and interviews around this work and dive deeper into these insights and get more specifics and just perform more community engagement overall. I think you'll get a lot of useful information out of that. And with that, also compensating people for their contributions. If it relates to Sweetwater Lake, then pulling from that Sweetwater Stewardship and Equity Fund. We also hope that EVLT and future researchers focus on tribal relations with the Ute peoples surrounding Sweetwater Lake, gathering input for management practices from them, and creating trust and a partnership with them that so far has not come to fruition completely. And with that, we would just like to thank everyone who was integral in getting this work done. So shout out to Bergen Josem and all the EVLT staff, Renata Arujo at EVOM, Dawson Metcalf and Dr. Brett Bruyere for advising us in the CLTL program, Dr. Tara Teal for helping us with our survey, our hosts in Eagle County, Sue Nicolai and Marky and Fedishak, as well as Susan and Greg Johnson, Estefania Godoy Vizcarra with the Vail Daily, and all of our family and friends who supported us along. Thank you.